Welcome, friends, to another gentle tale from the Chestnut Hollow Journal. Today we return to the cozy woods, where small creatures go about their quiet days in warmth and wonder. Find yourself a comfortable spot, perhaps a warm drink by your side, and let's step together into the peaceful world of Chestnut Hollow. The Winter Journal of Oak Hollow. The morning sun dappled through the canopy, spilling golden patterns across the hollow floor. It was one of those quiet days where the world seemed content to breathe and do nothing at all. Yet for the companions, nothing at all never lasted long. Hazel woke first and noticed the basket of laundry, mostly small cloths and aprons, that had been sitting untouched for 2 days. With a determined sigh, she hauled it outside to the brook. Pip stumbled out behind her, blinking against the light. "Laundry," he groaned. "On such a fine morning?" "Precisely because it's fine," Hazel replied, rolling up her sleeves. "The sun will dry it quicker than you can complain." Reluctantly, Pip joined her. He dipped a cloth in the brook, wrung it out, and immediately splashed more water onto himself and into the tub. Hazel laughed softly and showed him the right way. Soon, the two were side by side, scrubbing and humming, their chatter carrying downstream. Pip, despite his fussing, admitted later that the cloths looked brighter than he'd thought possible. Back at the hollow, Bramble was fixing something again, this time his own chair. A leg had grown wobbly, and he was determined to mend it properly. He set out tools, tested the balance, and muttered about sturdy workmanship. Thistle hovered nearby, curious as ever. "What if," she suggested, "you made the chair spin instead of just sit?" Bramble nearly dropped his hammer. "Spin? A chair's meant for sitting, not for dizzying." Thistle giggled and tried balancing on one leg of the chair until Bramble chased her away with mock growls. Later, Hazel and Pip returned with the laundry strung between trees, fluttering like pale flags in the sun. Thistle decided they looked too plain, so she tucked flowers into the clothespins, turning the drying line into a ribbon of blossoms. Pip pretended to scowl, but secretly admired how cheerful it looked. By evening, the hollow was full of small satisfactions. The laundry clean and sweet-smelling, Bramble's chair sturdier than before, and Thistle already sketching new improvements for other furniture. Nothing extraordinary had happened, yet they all felt the quiet joy of a day well spent, where simple tasks bound them closer together. The next day dawned with soft rain tapping on leaves and roof alike. Pip, staring gloomily at the damp woods, declared, "A day ruined." Hazel, however, saw it differently. "It's a perfect day for indoor work," she said, already pulling out a basket of mending. Bramble grunted agreement and fetched his carving tools. He had promised himself to finish a wooden spoon he'd started weeks ago, though he muttered about never having the time. Thistle, meanwhile, eyed the rain-slick window and sighed. "It will be perfect for painting if only the light were brighter," she said. Hazel handed her a candle, and soon Thistle was sketching by the flicker, muttering happily about shadows. Pip, restless, fidgeted. Hazel finally gave him a task, sorting a jar of buttons into size and color. At first he protested loudly. Buttons are not important, but soon he grew oddly absorbed, making neat little rows and patterns across the table. By the time Hazel looked up, he had arranged them into a mosaic of a bird in flight. "Not important?" she teased. Pip flushed but looked pleased. The rain pattered steadily, a soft lull that wrapped them in comfort. Bramble's spoon took shape under his steady paw, the shavings curling onto the floor. Thistle's sketch grew into a whimsical picture of the hollow itself, all cozy corners and dangling pine cones. Hazel mended a tear in Pip's cloak while humming, her voice blending with the rhythm of the rain. When the downpour finally softened to drizzle, they gathered around the fire with their completed projects: a strong spoon, a lively sketch, neat stitching, and a mosaic that made them laugh. Perhaps rain days aren't ruined after all, Pip admitted grudgingly, though he was already tucking his button birds safely on a shelf. That night, with the rain still whispering outside, the companions felt especially grateful for the hollow's warmth and for the small things that turned an ordinary stormy day into something memorable. By midweek, the weather cleared, and with it came a restless energy. Thistle declared that the hollow had grown too quiet and insisted on planning a picnic in the meadow near the oak sedge. Hazel, though hesitant, agreed. It had been too long since they'd simply wandered beyond their doorstep for leisure. The preparations were almost as much fun as the outing itself. Pip insisted on baking little oat cakes, though half of them ended up flatter than expected. Bramble contributed a jar of honey, carefully wrapped to avoid leaks. Hazel prepared sandwiches and fruit, while Thistle darted about, collecting wildflowers to weave into crowns. They set out under the bright sky, their baskets swinging between them. The meadow welcomed them with tall grass waving like green seas, the air filled with the drone of bees and the scent of clover. They spread a blanket beneath a birch and unpacked their feast. Pip immediately reached for honey. Bramble scolded him for sticky paws, and Hazel tried to maintain order while laughing at them both. Thistle, wearing a crown of daisies, proclaimed herself queen of the meadow and demanded everyone bow. Pip bowed so low he toppled sideways, sending the group into fits of laughter. After eating, they sprawled in the grass, watching clouds drift. Each cloud became a subject of debate. Was that one a rabbit or a dragon? A teacup or a boot? The arguments grew sillier until they were all breathless with laughter. Hazel, lying with her paws folded, thought quietly how good it was to have such peace. As the sun lowered, they gathered their things, leaving only flower crowns behind for the meadow to keep. The walk home was slow, filled with chatter about which part of the picnic was best. Thistle's flowers, Pip's oatcakes, surprisingly edible after all, were the honey that vanished all too quickly. Back at the hollow, tired but glowing from the day, they realized it had been one of the simplest and happiest afternoons yet. For all the grand adventures they'd shared, sometimes the best memories came from nothing more than food, laughter, and a sky full of clouds. The morning after their meadow outing dawned with that golden stillness that only autumn could bring. Mist curled low around the trees, while the rising sun painted everything in pale amber. Inside the hollow, Hazel woke first, as she often did, and found herself thinking that it had been far too long since their pantry was properly inventoried. She tugged open the cupboard and frowned at the jumble. Jars of preserves stacked on their sides, sacks of grains slumping into corners, and bundles of herbs dangling half-forgotten. By the time Pip stumbled into the room, rubbing his eyes, Hazel had a quill and scrap of paper out, making a list. "We're running low on flour," she muttered, "and the dry berries are nearly gone. I don't know how we've been living in such disarray." Pip groaned. Disarray is just another word for character. It's another word for a headache, Hazel countered. Bramble entered, carrying kindling, and peered into the cupboard. Hazel's right. Last week I thought I had sugar for my tea, and it turned out to be salt. Nearly choked. He chuckled, though Hazel gave him a look of sympathy. Thistle, who had been sketching near the window, perked up. "Then today shall be market day. Let's make an outing of it. I'll carry my drawings and see if anyone wants to trade for ribbons or buttons." Hazel hesitated. Market days were busy and loud, and while she didn't mind them, she also knew how easily Pip got distracted. But the thought of fresh supplies was too tempting to resist. "Very well," she said, "but let's be organized about it. I'll write what we need, and we'll divide the tasks." Soon, the four of them were bustling down the forest path, basket handles creaking in their paws. The village market was alive with color, stalls overflowing with root vegetables, nuts piled in woven baskets, jars of honey gleaming like amber glass. The chatter of neighbors carried through the air, mingled with the bleating of goats and the caw of a merchant's crow. Hazel guided them firmly, ticking items off her list as they went. Bramble haggled good-naturedly for flour, trading one of his sturdy carved spoons as part of the bargain. Thistle bartered a sketch of a barn owl in flight for a bundle of ribbons, which she immediately wove into her hair. Pip, naturally, got lost more than once, drawn toward shiny trinkets or the scent of roasting nuts. But Hazel reeled him back, and each time with a patient hand on his shoulder. At one stall, they paused to watch a potter shaping clay on a wheel. Pip leaned close, fascinated by the way the lump transformed under steady hands. "I could do that," he whispered. "We'd have plates and mugs of our own. You'd have clay up to your ears," Hazel teased, but she didn't discourage him entirely. By the time the sun tilted westward, their baskets were heavy with flour, dried berries, honey, and a few treats besides. They carried their bounty home, weary but content. That evening, Hazel stood back and admired their now neat pantry, lined with jars, sacks, and bundles placed in tidy rows. It was more than order. It was a sense of comfort, of knowing the Hollow could provide through the colder months. As they sat to supper, Pip declared, "Market days are exhausting." Yet his paws lingered on the little clay whistle he'd bartered for, and his grin betrayed him. The following day was bright and brisk, with air that carried a hint of frost. Hazel, still pleased with the pantry's new order, decided the companions ought to use some of their fresh supplies. "A stew," she announced, "thick enough to warm us for days." Bramble lit the fire while Pip chopped vegetables under Hazel's watchful eye. He made a show of groaning at the work, though he secretly enjoyed being trusted with the task. Thistle, meanwhile, insisted on baking bread to accompany the stew. She had never quite mastered dough, but her enthusiasm was undeniable. By midday, the Hollow smelled of onions, carrots, and herbs, with bread rising on the hearthstone. Pip kept stealing taste from the bubbling pot until Hazel finally batted his paw away with a wooden spoon. "You'll leave us nothing but broth if you carry on." "I'm testing for quality," Pip protested. Bramble, with his steady hands, cut neat slices of cheese to serve alongside. "We ought to invite neighbors," he mused. "There'll be plenty." Hazel brightened at the thought. It had been some time since they'd shared a meal beyond their circle. With a quick word, Thistle darted out to fetch their nearest friends, a pair of hedgehogs who lived in the hollowed log by the brook, and a family of field mice from the slope. Soon, the Hollow buzzed with cheerful voices. The meal stretched long into the afternoon. The hedgehogs told a story about trying to keep apples safe from squirrels, while the mice children recited rhymes that made everyone laugh. Pip performed dramatic retellings of their trip to the market, exaggerating wildly until Hazel nearly choked on her stew. Bramble sat back, content, watching the table crowded with bowls and paws and happy faces. When the bread emerged golden from the hearth, it was greeted with applause. Thistle beamed as everyone tore off pieces, though Hazel suspected Bramble had discreetly helped shape the dough while Thistle was distracted. By the time the sun set, the Hollow was warm with firelight and fellowship. The visitors trickled home, their bellies full, while the companions tidied together in quiet harmony. As Hazel dried the last bowl, she thought that nothing grand was needed. Just good food, good company, and the simple pleasure of sharing what they had. 2 days later, with the pantry well-stocked and their bellies still recalling the hearty stew, Thistle proposed something new. "We always work, or clean, or cook," she said, twirling a ribbon around her paw. "Why not a day of games?" Pip perked up immediately. "Games?" "Yes," Thistle declared. "Outdoors in the meadow. A day where no chores are allowed." Hazel started to object. There were always chores, but then she saw the hopeful gleam in their eyes. "Very well," she said with a sigh that wasn't truly reluctant. One day, they carried a ball of twine, some sticks, and a cloth to mark as a flag. In the meadow, they invented contests, leaping across logs, balancing on stones, chasing the flag as it flapped in the wind. Bramble proved surprisingly nimble for his size, while Pip darted like lightning, though he often forgot which direction he was supposed to run. Hazel, at first hesitant, soon found herself laughing as she tried to tag Thistle, who darted in circles. They paused only to nibble on apples brought in a satchel. Then Thistle invented a new game, drawing a line in the dirt and seeing who could toss pine cones closest without rolling past. Bramble's steady throws often landed nearest, though Pip accused him of using unfair bear strength. As the afternoon deepened, their laughter echoed across the clearing. At one point, they all collapsed into the grass, breathless, staring up at the sky that had grown soft with clouds. Hazel realized she hadn't felt so carefree in a long time. No list, no plan, just the joy of movement and company. When they finally trudged home, paws muddy and fur tousled, Hazel admitted, "Perhaps we should allow for games more often." Pip grinned. "See, not everything needs to be tidy." She laughed, conceding the point. That night they curled up by the fire, muscles sore, hearts light, and made plans to invent even more games before the frost came heavy. The morning after their games in the meadow, the companions found themselves pleasantly sore and still buzzing with laughter. Hazel rose first, stretching and wincing a little at the ache in her legs. She went about tidying the common room, humming softly when she noticed the way the light pooled oddly through the window. It had the pale silver tint that only came after a rainstorm. Stepping outside, she breathed deeply. The forest smelled of damp bark and earth, rich and grounding. Droplets still clung to every leaf, and the hollow seemed wrapped in a hush, broken only by the drip-drip of water falling from the canopy. It felt like a day meant for something slow. When the others woke, they agreed. Bramble yawned and suggested, "Why don't we do some mending? My cloak tore on that log yesterday, and my satchel strap is hanging by a thread," Thistle added, twirling it in her paws. Pip groaned, but Hazel gave him a look. "Better to mend today than let it worsen tomorrow." "Besides," she added, softening, "we can make a pot of tea, sit by the fire, and talk while we work." So the day unfolded gently. They gathered in the common room, each with something needing attention. Hazel had her needles ready, Bramble his carving knife to smooth, splintered handles, Thistle a pile of loose ribbons she wanted to stitch into her scarf. Pip tried to sulk at first, but soon discovered that darning socks could be oddly satisfying, especially when Bramble complimented his neat stitches. They traded stories as they worked. Hazel recalling a winter years ago when a snowstorm trapped her for 3 days, Bramble describing the first spoon he ever carved, which had snapped the moment he tested it. Laughter came easily, mingling with the steady rhythm of their hands. At midday, Pip declared the tea tasted better after work, though Hazel suspected it was simply the biscuits she had set out. Thistle insisted on tying ribbons around everyone's paws to mark our productivity, which resulted in Pip accidentally dipping his ribbon into his cup. By evening, the hollow looked subtly transformed, cloaks patched, tools repaired, ribbons brightening the mantle. It was not a day of adventure, but Hazel realized that such days carried their own quiet magic, a sense of readiness, of harmony between effort and ease. As they drifted to sleep, rain began again outside, and the steady patter was like an approving lullaby. 2 mornings later, the companions woke to find the air crisp, the kind that turned breath to mist. Hazel had been wondering when they would need to prepare for the first real frost, and seeing the grass sparkle white confirmed it. "We should gather wood," Bramble said practically, pulling on his boots. Yes, and stock kindling inside, Hazel agreed. But also, what about lantern oil? If the nights grow longer, we'll need more light. Thistle clapped her paws. We can make it a lantern evening. Let's bring them out, polish the glass, and light them when the sun sets. Pip grinned. If we're polishing lanterns, I'm claiming the brightest one. The day was spent partly in work, partly in play. They trekked into the woods, collecting fallen branches and cutting larger logs into manageable pieces. Bramble hauled the heaviest loads, while Pip carried smaller bundles and pretended they were logs twice his size. Hazel bundled kindling neatly with twine, humming as she worked, while Thistle filled her sketchbook with quick drawings of frosted leaves and mushrooms. Back at the hollow, they stacked the wood carefully, Bramble showing Pip how to leave space so air could flow. As the sun dipped, they brought out their lanterns. Some were plain, some painted with swirls of color, one even shaped like a little house with windows that glowed when lit. Hazel polished each pane until it shone, while Pip tried to balance his lantern on his head, an effort that ended, predictably, with Hazel scolding and Bramble chuckling. When at last the lanterns were lit, the hollow glowed as if touched by starlight. They carried them outside, placing them along the path and in the branches of the nearest trees. The forest transformed, shadows retreating before warm golden light. Neighbors passing by paused to admire. A mole nodded approvingly. A pair of owls called softly from above. Thistle clapped her paws in delight, declaring, "It looks like a festival." Hazel smiled. "No festival, just us, making our home brighter." The four of them lingered in the glow, sipping warm cider, watching their lanterns sway gently in the night breeze. It was a simple thing, but it filled their hollow with light and their hearts with warmth against the coming cold. Another morning arrived with heavy fog rolling through the forest. It was so thick that Hazel could hardly see the path beyond the door. "A day for staying close," she murmured, pulling her shawl tighter. Pip, however, had other ideas. Fog makes everything mysterious. What if there are hidden treasures waiting just beyond the meadow? Bramble raised an eyebrow. Or you trip over a root and land face first in the mud. Thistle, ever imaginative, sided with Pip. We could explore just a little. Draw maps of what the world looks like in fog. It won't stay forever. Hazel relented, though she insisted they stick together. So the four of them set out, each carrying a lantern from the night before. The fog wrapped around them, soft and muffled, so that even their voices seemed swallowed. They wandered only as far as the brook, but the familiar world looked transformed. Trees loomed like giants, their tops disappearing into white. Dew-dropped webs glistened like strings of pearls. The brook itself was barely visible until they were right beside it, the water's surface steaming faintly in the cold. Thistle sketched eagerly, noting how shapes dissolved into mist. Pip darted ahead and declared every stump a mysterious monument. Bramble followed patiently, keeping one paw on Pip's shoulder whenever he ventured too far. Hazel felt her usual caution ebb into wonder. There was beauty in the way the world hid and revealed itself. They didn't uncover treasures, but they did find an old hollow log filled with mushrooms glowing faintly from within. Pip gasped and insisted it was enchanted, while Hazel carefully explained it was just the natural light of fungi. Still, even she couldn't deny the sight was magical. By the time they returned to the hollow, fur damp and cheeks flushed, the fog was already thinning. They placed their lanterns back on the mantel and set a pot of tea to steep. Pip insisted on calling the day their Great Fog Expedition, and Thistle promised to finish her sketches into proper maps. Hazel, sipping her tea, admitted quietly, perhaps Pip was right. There was treasure after all, not gold, but something worth remembering. And so another ordinary day, shaped by weather and whim, became a story that would be told and retold by the fire for many evenings to come. The fog had gone at last, burned away by a slow, patient sun. In its place came a clarity so sharp that every branch, every pebble on the path seemed etched in perfect detail. Hazel was the first to step outside that morning, shawl wrapped close, and she paused on the threshold with a little intake of breath. The air had that bright, crisp quality that promised winter was not far off. The brook glistened silver in the dawn, its surface mirrored in calm, while the canopy above shone with the last embers of autumn. Leaves clung stubbornly, but each breeze shook a few loose, and they spiraled gently to the earth, carpeting the hollow in russet and gold. Hazel stooped to pick up one especially fine oak leaf and tucked it into the ledger they had begun keeping weeks ago, a record not just of chores and weather, but of anything they felt worth remembering. Inside, Pip was stirring awake, scratching his head and yawning. He stumbled out to join Hazel and blinked against the brightness. "Why is everything so sparkly?" he muttered. Hazel smiled. "Because the world has washed itself clean." It was the kind of day that begged for activity, though none of them quite knew what sort. Thistle suggested painting the view before the leaves vanished. Bramble wanted to cut more wood, practical as always. Pip groaned at the thought of labor and insisted that surely there must be something more exciting to do. In the end, it was Hazel who decided. "The brook needs clearing," she said firmly. "Branches have fallen in, and if the rains come, they'll block the flow. Best we see to it now." So they gathered tools. Bramble with a sturdy hook, Pip with a small spade, more for poking than digging, Hazel with a pair of shears, and Thistle carrying her sketchbook, promising she would help after just one or two drawings. The brook ran lively today, freed of yesterday's fog, but as Hazel had feared, several branches and clumps of leaves had collected in the bends. Bramble waded in first, the cold water swirling around his ankles. "Heavens, it's like ice," he gasped, but pressed on, tugging at a stubborn branch lodged against a stone. Pip, laughing at Bramble's grimaces, tried to prod it loose with his spade, only to splash himself thoroughly. Hazel, standing on the bank, trimmed back the reeds while Thistle sketched the entire scene. Her friends floundering in the brook, formatted with spray. Despite the chill, there was laughter in the air. Pip slipped on a mossy rock and landed with a squeak that echoed down the hollow, sending Thistle into peals of laughter. Even Hazel, usually composed, chuckled as she reached down to help him up. Bramble at last freed the branch, holding it aloft like a trophy before tossing it onto the bank with a grunt. By midday, their paws and clothes were damp, but the brook ran clear, water sparkling as it wound its way through the woods. They spread themselves on a dry patch of grass, eating the sandwiches Hazel had packed. Thistle showed them her sketches. Pip mid-fall, Bramble scowling at the cold, Hazel with her paw extended in kindness. Pip pretended outrage, but secretly adored how she had captured the moment. On the way back, they gathered fallen leaves and nuts, filling baskets with acorns and chestnuts. Pip insisted on carrying the heaviest basket to prove his strength, though Hazel quietly took it from him when his arms began to shake. Evening settled gently, with lanterns lit once more and the hollow filled with warmth. Hazel roasted the chestnuts, Bramble polished his tools, Thistle spread her sketches across the table, and Pip, exhausted from his watery misadventures, dozed in a chair. It had been a day of small tasks, yet Hazel felt deeply satisfied. The brook was cleared, the ledger would gain new pages of memory, and her companions, damp, tired, cheerful, were safe and content under the oak. She thought, as she banked the fire, that perhaps happiness lay less in grand adventures and more in these steady, ordinary labors done side by side. The next morning brought a different challenge. Hazel opened the cupboard to find that their supply of candles had dwindled alarmingly. Only 3 remained, stubby and half-burnt. With nights growing longer, that would not suffice. We'll have to make more, she announced over breakfast. Pip, halfway through a mouthful of porridge, nearly choked. Make? You mean with hot wax and everything? Of course, Hazel replied calmly. It's simple work if done carefully. Bramble nodded. I'll fetch the wax. The beekeeper up near Maple Rise always trades for chestnuts, and we've plenty from yesterday. So after tidying up, Bramble and Pip set off, basket of chestnuts in tow, while Hazel and Thistle prepare the hollow. They cleared the table, set out strings for wicks, and fetched small molds Bramble had once carved from hollowed wood. By the time the others returned, arms laden with blocks of golden wax, the hollow was ready. The air soon filled with a rich, honeyed scent as Hazel melted the wax carefully over the fire. Pip hovered at a safe distance, muttering about how easily one could singe their whiskers. The process proved absorbing. Hazel dipped the wicks, steady and patient, while Bramble cut the cooled ends neatly. Thistle, of course, couldn't resist adding flourishes, tying little ribbons to some, carving patterns into others while still soft. Pip tried dipping one, but dropped it straight into the pot, splashing wax across the table. Hazel sighed but smiled, wiping it away. As the day wore on, the pile of candles grew, short and stout, tall and slim, some plain, some adorned with flowers pressed into their sides. By dusk, they had dozens, enough to last through many winter nights. They lit the first batch at supper, filling the hollow with a golden glow. Shadows danced across the walls, soft and reassuring. Hazel felt proud, not only of the candles, but of how each one bore a touch of her companions. Bramble's steady paw, Thistle's whimsy, Pip's clumsy enthusiasm. Later, as they sat together with mugs of warm milk, Pip admitted, "Candles aren't so dull after all. Though next time, I'll just hold the basket." They laughed, and Hazel thought how even ordinary work became delightful when shared. Outside, the woods lay quiet under a thin frost, but inside the hollow, the flicker of their new candles made the world feel endlessly warm. The following day dawned gray and blustery. The wind rattled branches and scattered leaves in great swirling gusts. It was not a day for ventures far afield, yet refused to let them simply sit idle. Hazel decided they should sort the attic. Over the years, odds and ends had been tucked away beneath the roof, and the clutter had grown impossible to ignore. Pip groaned loudly. "The attic? It's full of dust and spiders." "Exactly why it needs tidying," Hazel said firmly. Reluctantly, they climbed the creaky ladder. The attic greeted them with a musty smell and beams of light cutting through small windows. Dust motes swirled like tiny dancers in the air. Boxes and bundles crowded every corner. Old clothes, chipped cups, baskets with broken handles, and mysterious parcels tied in faded string. They began slowly, sorting one pile at a time. Bramble examined tools to see which could be repaired. Hazel folded linens, setting aside those too worn to mend. Thistle delighted in opening every box, exclaiming over forgotten treasures. A seashell from a trip long ago, a scarf embroidered with acorns, a broken pocket watch. Pip, meanwhile, found himself distracted. He discovered an old wooden top and spent several minutes spinning it across the floor until it wobbled into a box of feathers, which exploded in a flurry. Hazel scolded, but laughter softened her tone. The most remarkable find came when Thistle opened a small chest and gasped. Inside lay letters, neatly folded, written in a fine hand. Hazel lifted one carefully, reading aloud words from a relative who had once lived in the hollow generations ago. The letters spoke of winters endured, gardens planted, and the comfort of family. They fell into silence, touched by the voices of the past. "It feels like they're still here with us," Thistle whispered. Hazel nodded. We're part of something that stretches back further than we see. They decided to keep the letters in a place of honor downstairs, beside the ledger, so old memories and new could rest together. By late afternoon, the attic was neater. Dust swept away, boxes stacked tidily, only useful things kept. Exhausted, they sat beneath the beams, nibbling biscuits Hazel had wisely brought along. The wind roared outside, but up here, surrounded by relics and stories, they felt sheltered. That night, after carrying the letters down, they read a few more by firelight. Pip grew restless with so much reading, but eventually admitted he liked hearing about how others once laughed and worked beneath the same oak. Hazel closed the ledger with care. "Today we tidied more than the attic," she said softly. "We tidied our hearts too." And though the wind still shook the trees, inside the hollow there was peace, woven from past and present, from dusted boxes and freshly lit candles, from companions whose lives, like the letters, were stories waiting to be cherished. The stormy winds that had rattled the attic through the night finally quieted by morning, leaving the woods damp, glistening, and eerily still. Droplets clung to every leaf and twig, turning the hollow into a place of shimmering jewels when the sun pierced through the clouds. Pip was the first to notice the silence. He poked his head out of the burrow's doorway, whiskers twitching, and frowned. "It's too quiet," he said. "Where are the birds? Where's the chatter?" Hazel joined him, shawl wrapped tightly around her. "They're sheltering still. Storms unsettle even the smallest of wings." Thistle, notebook in paw, smiled at the strange hush. "All the better for listening to the trees themselves," she whispered. And indeed, if one listened carefully, the oaks and beeches creaked faintly, as though exhaling after a long night of battering winds. Bramble stretched his sore arms from the attic work of the day before. "Quiet or not, there's work to be done. The storm surely scattered branches, maybe blocked paths. If we don't tend to it, the brook and the garden might suffer." Hazel nodded. She was already making a mental list. Paths to clear, garden beds to check, perhaps even helping the smaller creatures of the wood if nests or burrows have been damaged. "Let's make it a day of mending," she said. They set out together, baskets on their backs, tools at their sides. The forest bore the storm's marks. Branches torn down, leaves plastered thick against the earth, puddles pooling where the ground dipped. The brook that yesterday had run so clear was now choked with twigs and sodden leaves once again. Pip groaned at the sight. "Didn't we just clear this?" "Nature doesn't wait for tidy schedules," Hazel replied with patience. "It teaches us persistence." So once more, Bramble waded in, muttering about the icy bite, while Pip tried to keep his footing on slippery stones. Hazel trimmed reeds broken by the weight of water, and Thistle knelt at the bank, sketching the way light fractured across the brook's swirling surface. She promised the drawing would remind them of this day, long after the storm's mess was forgotten. After hours of work, their paws were muddy, their fur damp with spray, but the brook ran free again. They rested beneath a willow, sharing apples Hazel had packed, listening as the first tentative birdsong returned to the woods. But the storm had done more than scatter branches. As they returned toward the hollow, they found the old fence around their little garden half collapsed. Bramble grunted, rolling up his sleeves. "This will take some fixing." Hazel fetched twine, and together they straightened posts and wove fallen branches between them for sturdiness. Pip held nails and occasionally dropped them, while Thistle decorated the repaired rails with bits of ribbon she found in her bag, claiming even fences deserved beauty. By the time they finished, the fence looked sturdier than before, with a cheerful charm that made them all smile. Evening brought exhaustion, but also satisfaction. Lanterns glowed, and the hollow smelled of stew simmering over the fire. Pip sprawled dramatically across a chair, groaning about his sore back, but grinned when Hazel handed him a steaming bowl. "Storms test us," Hazel said softly, gazing at her companions gathered close. "But they also remind us how strong we are together." The others murmured agreement, and Thistle lifted her mug in a small toast to mending what the wind cannot break. And so the hollow was warmed not only by stew and fire, but by the quiet certainty that no storm, however fierce, could scatter what they held between them. The days that followed grew steadily colder. Frost painted the ground each morning in silver lace, and their breaths puffed like smoke in the dawn air. One morning, when Hazel stepped out with her broom to sweep the doorstep, she nearly slipped. An icy glaze had formed overnight across the stone. "Winter is at the door," she announced as the others joined her, blinking sleepily into the frosty brightness. That simple declaration set their day into motion. Winter meant preparation. Hazel unrolled a list so long that Pip staggered backward in mock horror. "How do you expect us to finish all that before the snow falls?" With steady paws and patient hearts, Hazel replied firmly. The list included everything from stacking firewood to patching tiny gaps in the hollow's walls, from checking their food stores to stitching warmer clothes. Each companion claimed a task. Bramble, practical and strong, took to chopping and stacking wood. The rhythmic thunk of his axe echoed through the woods as neat piles of logs grew higher. Pip was sent to patch holes, though his enthusiasm wavered when he found himself balancing on stools and ladders. Hazel and Thistle sorted food stores, discarding anything spoiled and carefully sealing jars of preserved berries, nuts, and roots. Yet amid the bustle, there was joy. They sang while they worked, simple songs passed down or made up on the spot. Pip invented verses so silly that even Hazel laughed, though she shook her head and reminded him not to drop nails while trying to rhyme. One task in particular drew them all together, stitching warmer garments. Hazel had gathered old cloth and wool scraps from the attic tidying, and now, by firelight, they set to work. Bramble awkwardly threaded needles, grumbling that his paws were too big for such delicate work, while Pip declared himself a master tailor after sewing 2 crooked patches onto a scarf. Thistle, of course, embroidered tiny flowers and leaves along the hems, while Hazel guided them with patient instructions. By night's end, they had a pile of scarves, mittens, and cloaks, not perfect, but warm and filled with the unmistakable charm of their efforts. Pip paraded about in a cloak that dragged comically behind him until Hazel trimmed it shorter. Bramble, despite his grumbles, secretly admired the mitten Thistle had embroidered with a single oak leaf. The next day, they tested their winter readiness with a long walk through the woods. Dressed in their new garments, they crunched across frosty leaves, breath puffing in clouds. Hazel carried a basket of dried berries to share, and Thistle sketched the white sheen across the branches. They came upon a family of field mice struggling to repair their burrow, which had partially caved in from the storm. Without hesitation, the companions helped, Bramble lifting heavy clumps of soil, Pip darting about with scraps of wood, Hazel shoring up the entrance, and Thistle keeping the little ones entertained with quick drawings in the frost. When the work was done, the mice offered them a simple meal of seeds and tea. Pip tried to hide his disappointment at the plainness, but Hazel gently nudged him, and he remembered his manners. They shared smiles and warmth, and Hazel knew this too was part of preparing for winter. Not just wooden food, but kindness sown among neighbors. That night, as lanterns flickered and they wrapped themselves in their new garments, Hazel marked the ledger, preparations well underway. Warmth enough for all, within and beyond these walls. The frost outside thickened, but in the hollow, laughter and companionship wove a cocoon that no cold could pierce. Snow fell at last. It began one quiet evening as they sat by the fire, Pip retelling, with great exaggeration, how he alone had saved the brook from drowning in storm debris. Thistle, sketching the scene, kept correcting his tale, while Bramble shook his head and Hazel stirred a pot of stew with half a smile. Then Pip suddenly stopped mid-sentence, eyes wide. "Look!" he cried, pointing at the window. Tiny flakes drifted down, caught in the lantern glow, slowly at first, then thicker, until the world beyond their windows turned white. The companions rushed outside, laughter bubbling despite the cold. They lifted paws and faces to the sky, letting snow settle on their fur. Pip immediately began rolling a ball, shouting, "Snow Fort," while Thistle danced in circles, sketchbook forgotten in her delight. By morning, the hollow lay beneath a deep quilt of snow. The garden fence was half buried, the brook muffled, the forest hushed. It was a new world, pristine, glimmering, magical. They spent the day reveling in it. Bramble, serious as ever, insisted they first shovel a clear path to the brook and woodpile. Hazel agreed, and together they carved neat trails, piling snow high on either side. Pip turned his mound into the beginnings of a fort, quickly joined by Thistle, who declared herself its queen. Snowballs soon flew across the hollow, laughter ringing through the trees, until Hazel raised her voice, reminding them not to waste all their strength at once. In the afternoon, they built a great snowman, tall and stout, dressed in one of Pip's discarded scarves. Thistle added a crown of twigs, declaring him the king of winter, while Bramble grumbled about wasting good cloth but smiled nonetheless. Hazel stood back, heart warmed at the sight of her companion's joy. Evening brought them back inside, cheeks flushed, paws tingling. Hazel prepared hot soup, while Thistle sketched the snowman from memory. Pip acted out the snowball battle with dramatic flair, and Bramble mended a sled they had found in the attic. That night, the hollow glowed brighter than ever. Candles flickered, stew simmered, snow pressed soft against the windows. Pip leaned back in his chair with a sigh of contentment. "If winter is always like this," he said, "I might never long for spring." Hazel smiled, though she knew spring would bring its own gifts. For now, she was content too. She marked the ledger one more time. First snow, joy abundant, companions safe and warm. And as the snow fell steady outside, wrapping the world in quiet wonder, the hollow stood as a beacon of light and laughter, proof that even in the deepest cold, warmth could be kindled and kept, so long as hearts beat together in harmony. The snow deepened over the following week, blanketing the world so thoroughly that it muffled every sound. Each morning, when Hazel opened the shutters, the hollow looked transformed, as though they were living in the middle of a dream carved in white. Paths disappeared overnight, and icicles grew long and clear like glass blades from the eaves. It was in this stillness that Hazel suggested they try something new, keeping a winter journal together. Not just the ledger, she explained, but a record of what the days feel like. The things we see, the sounds, the scents. Winter is long and sometimes heavy, but if we notice its small gifts, we'll find the beauty too. The idea delighted Thistle, who immediately decorated the cover of a blank book with pressed leaves and careful drawings. Pip scoffed at first. What's the point of writing down that my paws are cold? But soon found himself eager to add jokes and exaggerated accounts of their adventures. Bramble, quieter, wrote simply of the tasks he took on, but his steady notes added balance to Pip's whimsy. Their days became a gentle rhythm of chores, play, and journal entries. In the mornings, they shoveled fresh paths and knocked snow from the garden fence. At midday, they often brewed strong tea and gathered near the window to watch the light shift over the snowy woods. Thistle sketched the way branches bent under the weight. while Hazel noted the bird tracks across the snowdrifts. Pip invented names for the smallest prints, declaring them to belong to the great feathered stomper or the invisible snow hopper, and Bramble dutifully corrected him, writing in the real species beside the nonsense. One afternoon, as they walked their cleared path to fetch more wood, they discovered something unusual, a small hollow beneath a pine, sheltered from the snow. Inside huddled a hedgehog, wide-eyed and clearly disturbed from its winter rest. The poor creature shivered, unprepared for the cold. Without hesitation, Hazel scooped it gently into a basket she always carried. "We'll help it warm again." Perhaps it woke too early. Back in the hollow, they built a little nest of cloth and straw near the fire. Pip hovered nearby, curious, while Thistle whispered encouragement to the tiny creature. Bramble brought a saucer of water. Slowly, the hedgehog calmed, curling tight in its nest. They named him Cinder, after the warm glow of the hearth that now kept him safe. For several days, he stayed with them, dozing in his makeshift bed, while Hazel researched through the old letters and notes they'd found in the attic how best to care for a winter-woken hedgehog. Eventually, when the weather softened slightly, they returned him to a safer, better-sheltered den outside, tucking extra leaves and moss around him. That evening, Pip wrote in the winter journal, "Today we saved a prickly friend from the frost. I think he liked my jokes, even if he didn't laugh." Perhaps hedgehogs are shy about humor. Bramble added beneath it, "He survived because we worked together." And Thistle drew a small sketch of Cinder curled in his nest, with Hazel's careful handwriting labeling it. Hazel read the page aloud before bed, her heart swelling. "This," she said softly, "is why we keep such records, so that on long winter nights, when the wind howls, we remember the warmth we've made." And as snow pressed softly against the window panes, they leaned closer together, the hollow filled not only with firelight, but with the glow of words, drawings, and shared memory. Proof that even in the quietest days, life in Oak Hollow held meaning, detail, and joy. The end. Thank you for joining us in the quiet corners of Chestnut Hollow. If you enjoyed this story and would like to wander with us again, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share it with others who love cozy woodland adventures. Until next time, may your days be gentle and your evenings restful.